Thanks for listening in to another episode of Conversations with Alison, Jaye, The Journey to Here. Please remember to subscribe, hit the like button and share. Hello and welcome to Conversations with Alison, Jaye, The Journey to Here. I'm your host, Alison Jaye. Today, we're going to be having a conversation with Dr. Lois Lee. Dr. Lois is the founder of the organization Children of the Night. She is the world's leading expert in rescuing child sex trafficking victims. Dr. Lois wrote the book, The Pimp His Game, the basis of her training of thousands of members of law enforcement officers and her expert testimony in state and federal courts since the 80s. As a PhD student, Dr. Lois discovered children as young as 11 years old prostituting on the streets of Hollywood for food to eat and a place to stay. This was back in 1979. She realized that these youngsters were falling through the cracks of the social service system, and she made it her mission to help by opening her home to over 250 children over the span of the next 3 years. That is how Children of the Night began, where Dr. Lois still serves as a president. Dr. Lois, thank you for speaking to us on Conversations with Alison Jaye, The Journey to Here. Welcome, Dr. Lois. Thank you so much for joining me. It is actually a real honor and a privilege to be speaking with you. And as I mentioned when I reached out to you, there are so many things and so many topics of conversation and so many things happening in the world that I really believe need to be addressed, need to be exposed. And sex trafficking, child trafficking, abuse of any kind is one of those things that I really am passionate about bringing awareness to. So I just want to thank you for making yourself available to have this conversation, to just let people know what is really happening in this world. And one of the things I've read all about you, well, as much as the internet will allow, but I would like for you, please, to just let us know your journey into how you got into helping rescue children that are sex trafficking victims.
Well, I was in a PhD program in sociology, and I had to write a dissertation. And the professors wanted me to analyze census data of how many people were in Chicago and predict the next race riot. And it was something that I thought was really boring. And I was fortunate enough to be in San Francisco with a mentor of mine, a professor who opened up the paper and said, look, the first National Hookers Convention is across the street, which was a convention for Coyote. And Margot St. James, who was the leader, I went over there with my professor to meet them. And there were no prostitutes. They're mostly radical feminists. And Margot said, you can't be involved because you're not a prostitute, but here I want you to meet these two ACLU lawyers who had just sued Oakland Police Department for not arresting the men who came in who were seeing the prostitutes. And they said, why don't you do this to LAPD? And I thought, what a wonderful idea. I was young, I was 25 years old. And I came back to Los Angeles, met a lawyer, and I said, I'm funded by the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. I'm teaching in a university. I have a free research team. If you get the court order, I'll do the research. And so we did, and I created quite an uproar. And was ready to sue LA County and LA Sheriffs, LAPD, well, LA Sheriffs and LAPD twice. Was on my way to sue San Bernardino, Orange County. And to give you an idea of the time we lived in, the police chief in LAPD, when confronted by the press, said, well, the reason we arrest the women rather than the men is because the women have more sex. One night I was writing a term paper, I was sitting on my bed, and the news was on in the background, and I heard this man say, and now mind you, I'm 25, 26 years old. I hear this man say, if Lois Lee steps across the county line, we're going to have her arrested. So it was way, way ahead of my time and ahead of what's going on now. So in the process of being in the courtroom and testifying as an expert statistician for these young women, I got to know them. And it turned out there had been a serial murder known as the Hillside Stranglers, who had killed 10 girls. I knew the first victim. And the 11th victim, one of the girls who was an 18-year-old heroin addict running an escort service, called me one night to tell me she sent out a girl. She was missing. I found out where she was. The police would not go because she was just a whore. And I got very mad. And the press loved me because of my lawsuits, and I was good media. And the next morning, I called a reporter that night, and he took a camera crew out to the streets. And the next morning, I did an interview because she was Hillside Strangler victim number 11, a 17-year-old girl. And I said, if you're involved in the prostitution business and you think you know who the Hillside Strangler is and you don't want to talk to the cops, don't call them, call me. And my home phone number became the hotline for the Hillside Strangler investigation.
My goodness.
And I worked only with the press. I refused to talk to the police. And then the police had certain requests that I did help them with. But for the most part, I was not giving them all the information that was coming in. And I became a legend among massage parlor operators, pornographers, strip club owners, organized crime, pimps, prostitutes, madams, you name it. I became very well known nationwide and was a hero of the underground. And from there, I went into those sex clubs and those establishments and met people, and still as a researcher. But they told me about kids being in their businesses because Congress had changed a law that forbid the police from arresting children for running away. And they were not on the premises, and it was a problem for them because they were going to go to prison. And they asked me to take these kids and to set up a program. And I said to the kids, okay, come stay with me. And I did what I think any middle class researcher academic would do. And that was I took them to the Department of Social Services and asked social workers to put them in homes, and they refused because they were whores and prostitution was criminal.
So hold on, I'm sorry. So social services refused to put children in homes because they classify these children as whores?
As whores and criminals.
And even though they're children?
Pardon?
Even though they were just children?
12-year-olds, yes.
12, wow, my goodness.
The kids to the juvenile court to meet with the judges, and the judges refused to put them in treatment programs. You know, like if you get more services if you start a fire or you rob somebody. And they refused to put them in their treatment programs because the crimes were not property crimes and it would not serve the taxpayers. They were only hurting themselves. So I come from a really different background and experience than the other people who are working in the anti-sex trafficking movement. And I'm at odds with them on many, many issues because they don't understand the complexity of the system and the complexity of the new laws and how that helps kids and also how that negatively impacts kids. Because with the new laws of making trafficking such a severe criminal offense, gang members who now dominate most of the young girls who they were using for sex and selling for sex, now use them for crimes with guns. So the same kids that I was working with are now in jail for serious kinds of crimes because they were forced to drive the car while the guys, you know, were jumping out and shooting people. And that's the murder charges. And exactly the same kids. They were also raped and they were also being sex trafficked and their ads were put on Backpage and all of that stuff. But you know, there are worse things than sex, and we're really seeing kids who are really torn up and their lives have been just taken from them. Under the new law, we had a 24-bed shelter home, and it was really a Disneyland for kids. And we used to have parents who would call us and ask us to take their kids. And what happened in about 2017 is in 2018, the laws changed federally and state to where if an agency had contact with a child who was a sex trafficking victim, they had to call the human trafficking hotline, and that would trigger the FBI to come out and interview the child. And if there was a pimp involved, she would often go to jail, juvenile hall, and solitary confinement, and be held until she testified against that pimp. Sometimes a family member, sometimes a loved one. It's just not right. If they didn't have a pimp, they were forced into foster care, and they ran from foster care. So now they're running from foster care. They can't get medical services. They can't enroll in school. I mean, their whole livelihood, you know, is in jeopardy. And so they run back to the gangs and deeper into the criminal element. And so many laws have been created in Congress without any regard for the social impact or the fact of how they counteract or contradict. When I started, police were shocked when I told them I had this little girl who was 13, or this girl that they thought was a big madam was in fact only 17. And in LAPD, they're not soft guys. So it was hard, face-to-face verbal combat. But they listened. And we developed a model program in terms of how to deal with them as children, even outside the law, in between the laws, in the gray areas, and so that they weren't put in jail. And we started to model that across the country, and many vice detectives, vice agencies in law enforcement modeled that and copied it. Today, it has changed to where, and I am shocked when a cop says to me, "Don't listen to that little bitch, she's a lying little bitch," and I'm thinking, this is the same guy that used to help these kids. The environment, the culture has changed so much. The movement that I started has created billions of dollars for the Department of Justice, but they have a total lack regard for the child.
Wow, that is so heartbreaking, and yet in another way so eye-opening, that you would think that the safest place for these children to be is in with social services, that social services can help with that reforming.
Wait. Think about who wants to be a foster parent to a little girl who's been raped, who's provocative, who has jewelry where it doesn't belong, does weird things with her hair, and loves to be half dressed half the time, and likes to run around with tough guys, gang members and stuff. Who wants to foster that child? At the same time, when that child was 2 or 3 years old, it was really apparent she was headed on a track to where she probably would be a prostitute, a street kid. And we didn't help her then either. I had asked a child psychologist once, tell me, why is it I can't mobilize people to help these kids at the beginning, when they're newborns and they're taken to crack houses and raised in crack houses? How come I can't get society to care about that? And they want to care about the teenager. And they said, because the teenager sexually arouses America.
My goodness, that is you just struggle trying to get your head around the mentality that leads towards you not wanting to take the child when they're young to prevent this. That expression, bend the tree when it's young rather than trying when it's old. And so what is there that society can do? What can we do? Because obviously it looks as though we can't turn to the police because the police thinks they're whores. Even as to your point, there was a police officer that was once helping, but now is referring to her as a lying little bitch. What do we do with that?
I think it's too late to help that part of the system. But I do think that as members of society, we can demand that the hair follicle test is given to mothers who are delivering their babies in hospitals, and that we develop programs so that those children have access to foster care immediately when they're newborns, and they're not taken to crack houses to be raised, traded for drugs even as infants. That's where we have to start. And there's a whole notion of a baby being a property right. There's also social services has failed these children. Law enforcement's done their job. I don't expect them to be social workers and tough guys. They want to get the bad guy. They want to get their arrest. But the programs for children have not been developed. To give you an example of how bad that system is, there was a law at one time, and I think it still exists, that you cannot take a newborn baby from a hospital unless you have a car seat. So what happened? Social services didn't respond to that need, so now hospitals give the parents car seats to get the babies out of there because they don't have room. Figure that.
So really, that's so.
A hair follicle test or a pure way. crack addicts, meth addicts know that the other drug tests that are given to mothers who are about to give birth, that if they don't do crack for 2 days, that they'll test negative.
And of course they know this.
Yeah, of course. But think of the consequences of why we would, set up children for this torturous childhood. Why would we do that? Because we're really a pretty apathetic society who care mostly about our own children, our own lives, and it's not right. And I laugh at the notion of, under the current situation where the police are going to now have to hand off certain calls coming into 911 to unarmed social workers about they're not prepared to deal with this, they're not trained to deal with this. They're going to end up in the same situation as the police officers. They're either going to carry guns and shoot somebody because they're scared, or they're going to get hurt. So we have to start really, really young, and we have to start with restoring American values. The neighborhood, the public school, kids being able to play in the street, putting bad guys in jail. And I'm afraid that we may have to get tougher and rougher as law enforcement in order to do that, but we need to have the community behind it. You can scream and yell about all you want about how unfair things are and how unfair the police are, but you really need to look beyond the drama and see what the police record is or the parole record is of some of these people who are screaming and crying. I just got notified by a U.S. attorney about a man whose son was shot by the police, wrongfully so, and he and his spokesman were on Hannity for 20 minutes. And then President Trump called, to offer his condolences. Well, the family spokesperson is a pimp who we put in jail for 10, 15 years, 20 years ago. So what's that about? And to be able to get to Hannity and to get to President Trump, we're missing what it is we should be looking at. And we shouldn't be looking at just the face. We should be looking beyond the face at who's really doing the speaking. Who are these people?
Yeah. And that leads me into
Los Angeles. I don't think that we have as many racial tensions here in Los Angeles as we do in other parts of the United States. So like I'm not in Chicago, I'm not in New York.
And this leads me, the 2 points that I wanted to raise with you, and you've actually touched on it. Firstly, I want to dispel the myth that this is happening somewhere else, because if people think it's not happening in their country, in their backyard, they could easily just dismiss it like it's not a big issue and it's not a big problem. So that's one of the things where I just wanted to highlight that this is happening around the world. It's not just children being brought from third world countries over, as sometimes as you see in the media, it's happening right here.
Yes, but the Department of Justice has painted a picture that's not true. There is no boogeyman. There's not a little girl laying in her bed with her down comforter and loving mom and dad in the other room watching television, and some boogeyman reaching in the window and grabbing her and running off and selling her to a sex trafficking ring. No, we're talking about kids who never had a chance from the get-go. And we're talking about kids who had trouble that were easily recognizable in Head Start programs or in schools, and were on the streets and were sexually abused oftentimes before they could walk. We're talking about kids that, I've had kids say to me, prostitution is better than the life I had at home. And a pimp will often say, you don't have to, lay in your bed at night with your mom's boyfriend or the drug dealer to come in and have sex with you so your mom can get high. I can show you how to have sex with men, how to control that sex, and how to make them pay you. And you can have your hair done and you have nails and you can have clothes and you can be somebody, and we'll put away the money and we'll build a business and have a beautiful house and children. That's what everybody wants. So you have to get who it is that's prostituting. This is not a pretty picture. These are not the pretty images that the department's putting up. But the Department of Justice was very active in coordinating religious organizations and setting up programs and setting up foster care. And they did this picture. You'll see this image quite frequently of a little girl sitting with her head down and her hands crossed. It says, "Help me," tattooed on her hands. Well, and then these good Christian people get these children, and the children are spitting in their face and cussing at them and calling them names, and maybe trying to seduce their husbands. They're going, "Lois, this is not what we were told." And I said, "I know, I'm sorry." Because it takes a lot more than to work with the kids at that stage than just good families, good Christian, good people.
That is so true, because I had read the book talking about the age by which all of our emotional programming is complete, and it's under the age of 10. So if these children are already caught in this cycle, as you mentioned, from being abused from before some of them could even walk, and they're not caught then for the most part, would you say that there really is, it's inevitable that they are going to end up in this kind of lifestyle?
Well, there's highly likely they will end up in this kind of lifestyle. The other part of that is something called differential association. One kid could meet a really nice family or go to school and have a mentor and become very successful, and the other kid meets a pimp or some gang members. So that who they meet has a lot to do with it. But they are predisposed as children. There's no question about that.
This is something that I just wish we could really spread across, to your point of saying it's not the image that we are fed, that it's the cute little girl from the nice little suburban home that's kidnapped. I mean, in some cases that could be the case, but for the most part, it's a lot of these children out there that they just didn't have a chance from the get-go.
Yes, lots of them.
And then another point that you mentioned is, and this is something that I have often wondered, and I have seen it on, you do see it on the television, where I can't remember the name of the movie that I watched, and it was about a sex trafficking ring, but it then showed, and this is probably going to sound very controversial, but it showed the people that were really behind this ring, and they were very powerful, well-to-do people. And it just makes me wonder, does art imitate life, or is life imitating art?
I don't know. That's quite a concept. But there's no question that no matter what level a person is economically, educationally, politically, that there is a certain number of people from that group who want to have sex with children. And as we've seen in the Epstein case. And, you know, I mean, right now I have friends who are in the security business working with law enforcement, and there's a lottery going in terms of how long will Gilan live. You know, she knows a lot. Epstein knew a lot. There's a lot of tapes around. There's a lot of, you know, and you know, Prince Andrew's only the tip of the iceberg. And we know who many of the other people are. Very wealthy, prominent people in this country.
And it just makes you wonder, and it does, I mean, for me, it just makes me wonder, my goodness, is there any hope? Is there any hope in really helping these children? Because not only in a lot of cases are the odds stacked against them, but when you have people in authority that just look at them as whores and prostitutes, when you have people in authority that are running scared because these tapes are out there, it's just one of those things where, is this something that we're going to ever be able to eradicate?
Well, not until we, you know, place a higher regard on our children. All children, not just of one color, not just of one race, not just one of social economic values or religion, of all children. You know, I guess, you know, maybe the Catholics are at the front of it in terms of their fight against abortion. And I'm not saying that's the answer. I'm just saying, but there's one segment who's working for children before they come into the world. And there's a big gap. Nobody's working with children until they're a sex trafficking victim. Foster care is inept. It entirely needs to be restructured. It could be simply restructured to protect the kids. But it's rampant with abuse, and there's no supervision of it. And it's not the solution to the problem.
And something you just said there, foster care and abuse in foster care.
Yes.
So talk to us about that. I mean, how do children end up in a foster care home where they're supposed to be put for their safety, but end up abused in that exact place they were put for their safety?
Because the way foster care is structured, it's very difficult to provide supervision in a foster care situation. And kids talk about frequently about how they say a social worker's coming, so everybody gets straight, they get it together, they get their stories together. The social worker talks to the child in front of the foster family. Or if they do say something, they don't know where they're going next. And sometimes it's better to stay where it is, it's bad, than to not know where you're going next, because it could be worse. So that system doesn't work. And you have to think that, who is it that's taking in these children? What's wrong with the American family that it's just my kid or my biological kid? What is it about our values that even the Christian movement, and I've talked to Christian leaders about this, is that the church has become, their movement has become exclusive, not inclusive. For example, family, good Christian family, mother's at home, father works, the child comes home from school and with other siblings, they have a homework table, they get snacks, they do their homework together. And next door is little Johnny, who's 9, his mom's a stripper, who would never be invited to that homework table because he may contaminate their kids.
My goodness, yeah.
And that is something that I really think that only the Christian movement can change, and it needs to start with them. They need to set the example, and I'm very disappointed in their efforts.
And it's very interesting that you should say that, because I was born, raised in the church. I'm also a minister, but I mean, I'm not a pastor or anything like that over a congregation. But one thing that I have long thought of and felt is, like, as you say, the church should do more and could do more. What would you like to see the church do? Because I was asked a question a few weeks ago, a panel I was on, and it was relating to domestic abuse and domestic violence, and what can the church do? And I've long said the first thing the church can do is admit it exists and admit it's a problem. I mean, what do you think to that? What do you say to that?
I think the church has to recognize they're the only American institution who can do something. And then they have to take a good hard look at their individual families in terms of what can we do? How can we be inclusive? How do we invite at the 5th grade birthday party all the kids in the 5th grade class? How do we stop that exclusion of that child who may not have the family support? How do we build a sense of community among our children? The other thing I want to talk about a little bit is government as an institution, and how government could address the foster care problem in a much better way. And that would be, you have to basically use the foster care system, but the children could all attend the same school. So you could have an elementary school, you could have middle school, and a high school where all foster kids would attend. So that you have the kids out of the foster home for long times during the day. And then that school, you have counselors, you have social workers, you're looking at kids for bruises, they could do their counseling, their therapy while they're at school. And yeah, we have to bus some of them, but we sure didn't seem to be bothered by busing kids of different ethnicities to try and level school. So that would be the worst of your problems. But then you would have a place where these kids, would grow up and have a whole set of social services available to them every day.
Right.
And so the fact that they're being abused would be easier determined. You can make the foster parents participate in a PTA, call it something else, and bring them together as a sense of community. There are things that can be done. There's a lack of motivation to do so. to me, it's, I don't like it. To me, I find it offensive, and it makes me very unhappy.
And quite rightly so. And I think for one of the things for just people in general, if it made more people unhappy, then maybe we would do something about it rather than to just try to behave as though it doesn't exist. And because, like you said, we are fed the Hollywood image of it being so sanitized. For example, that movie with Liam Neeson comes to mind, Taken. The cute little girl, while she goes on vacation and she's snatched from the airport, and then her father, with this set of skills, goes and rescues her and saves the day. But that is the image that we're fed.
It's a good movie.
It was, and Liam Neeson is a fellow countryman of mine. I'm not knocking it at all, because I have watched all of them, and I'm sure we've all heard that line, I have a certain set of skills. So
Just a movie.
But but that's the image that we're fed. And I think so for some people, I'm wondering, are they actually aware it really is a problem as it is, because we are fed such sanitized images of it?
Well, I don't think that they don't recognize that it's a problem, but it's a problem for people they don't relate to or care about or interact with.
That's interesting. It's a problem for people that they can't relate to.
They don't want to relate to it. They don't want that to be part of their life. They don't want that at their dinner table. They don't want them at their child's party. Again, it goes back to the exclusivity rather than the inclusive.
Wow, that is something, and it's actually just making me look and reflect on my own life. And I'm very grateful for when I was coming up in the 70s, I'm showing my age here, when I was coming up in the 70s, it wasn't like that. We had such a sense of community. Because I do recall that there was one particular household that I was a part of. The mother and father there, they did take in other children from around the community that they weren't related to and help them when they saw that they were living in very dangerous home environments. So I think we need to, in some respects, just move back to that sense of community. And back in the day when people didn't lock their back doors and the neighbors could come in and the children could run to for solace. I mean, if we got back to those kinds of values, do you think that would help?
Yes, I think it would help tremendously. And I think the same thing was true in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and somehow we lost it all. We lost our American values.
But you see, the thing is, it's not even just American values, because I was born and raised in London, and my parents and obviously family are from the Caribbean. So it was the same, just that sense of community, that sense of inclusion, as you say. And it wasn't a case of they may have looked down at the parents and the lifestyle that the parents were living, but they took the children in because they were concerned about the well-being of these children.
Well, I think that you'll see that continues to exist today in Italy and other parts of the world, particularly parts of the world where there's such, there's war and there's crisis, and people have band together as a village or as a community. It's just, to me, American, I think London would not be much different. This rugged individualism that's been talked about that, has made us successful, but also has tended to destroy the family.
Yeah, and it is.
You're talking about times when there weren't that many women working.
It's just one of those things where
situation of the home. And I'm a working woman. I mean, I would not, and I would not have it any other way. But the family structure needs to change to the extent that you do have a stable adult in the home who's maybe doing the meals, and if women are going to work and men are going to work, they're doing the meals and the housekeeping and making sure the homework's done and stuff. Maybe the family unit needs to change.
And yeah, because there is a point there, because we look at it and we think it's not just children from disadvantaged backgrounds now falling into gangs and prostitution and things like that. You now have children
play a big role too. I mean, drugs cannot be overlooked. And again, you look at big wealthy families who are, you know, producing the drugs, the opiates. You look at the Purdue's, you know. Why aren't they in jail?
That is a good question. So where do we go from here? Because one of the things that we need to do is raise awareness and let everybody know that, look, this is a problem and it happens in our own backyard. It's not happening in some country that we're only going to see on the news that will never affect us. It's happening around us. Where do we go from here? Where would you like to see us go from here? What can we do?
I think there's been enough awareness done. I think there's been a lot of lies told, a lot of myths, a lot of false advertising. I think that what's really required is a call to action.
And what does that look like?
It looks like getting churches to start preaching the sermon in terms of it's not just about abortion. It's about, you know, child rearing. It's about rescuing thy neighbor's child. It's about inviting the other child to the dinner table, to where people receive recognition, acceptance for doing that. That needs to be encouraged, considered acceptable behavior, and people that don't do that, they need to be frowned upon. So it's a matter of, that's the call to action. And again, I think that the strongest institution in America is the churches. It's the last standing institution in America that's really been preserved, because the family's been destroyed.
So, and I hope that this message can really get out there to them, that we need to take more responsibility so that we can save a lot more of these children. We may not get them all, but at least we can do more to try and save more than we're doing.
Yes. And you know, our children are America's greatest resource.
Yes, they are. They are. So how can, so I know that you said that it's a call to action. So what is next? I mean, so what are the next steps for you? What are the next steps for us?
Well, I'm not a person who's going to do, you know, I do what I say. I don't, you know, just talk about it. And so I'm going to continue doing Answering the Cries of kids who call me. I have hundreds of them across the country, 500 as a matter of fact. And I'm growing, and we've now gone global, and we're helping other kids in sex trafficking programs and living in Christian homes. And I do see people, I mean, I'm really impressed with what Australians are doing, that many of them are joining church efforts and working in foreign countries to develop programs for sex trafficking victims. And they work hard, and they make lots of sacrifices in doing that work. I'm going to continue answering the cries of individual kids. And I think that I've led this movement. I think I'll continue to lead the movement by my actions, not by what I say. So I don't take myself too seriously in terms of doing an interview or writing an article, in terms of taking public opinion or action, because everybody's got their own agenda, meaning the Department of Justice, meaning law enforcement, schools, and their self-preservation. And I think that we have to do, and I can only lead by example. And I'll give you an example of how it doesn't work, and one of the most frustrating things for me. In 2011, I created an online high school equivalency, face-to-face through Zoom program where we would tutor sex trafficking victims, face-to-face for the high school equivalency. We pay for all their identification. There's 4 parts of the test. We would pay for the registration. We'd even give them a lift to the test center. If they could pass 1 or 2 tests, we would take them for them to test, and to give them hope, to show them they weren't that far away. And next thing I knew, I was told there were 26 sex trafficking organizations in Los Angeles who were all doing educational programs, GED, high school equivalency programs. And this expert in education had interviewed all of them, and he said they didn't have one software program, not one teacher, not one program. Many of them didn't even call back. And it was just a trend, I would say. And the thing that really pushed it over the top for me was I received a call from a political consultant in a community received lots of money for their law enforcement sex trafficking task force, and they wanted to buy my GED high school equivalency program. I said, buy it. I didn't like create something. I have teachers, tutoring, working with people. They weren't interested. And they would have used it in order to identify more sex trafficking victims so they could do more arrests. They had no interest in helping anybody. They didn't want to commit $100,000 out of their millions that they got to teach kids how to pass the high school equivalency. So the commitment is so offensive to me. It makes me so angry that many times I'm isolated. I don't go to the meetings that I'm asked to come to. I don't speak to some of the groups with that because I don't, you know, they want to sit down and write down everything I say so they know what to say when they're doing their CNN interview, or so when they go out and they write speeches. And I don't have time for that. I want to spend my time with kids.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so where can you be found? Anybody needs help? Yes. Anybody needs help or advice? How can what can they do? So if somebody needs help, or if somebody knows of a child that's that they suspect is being caught up in this, or they just want to know more, get involved and just help, what can people do?
Go to our website, childrenofthenight.org, and also you can call our hotline, 800-551-1300, 24/7.
Okay, and can you repeat your website one more time for me, please?
It's www.childrenofthenight.org.
Okay, thank you. So anybody just wants some advice and direction, because we don't know who's going to hear this, and we don't know who's been having a concern of a child and didn't know where to turn or what to do. So hopefully that this will be able to do something, some ways, even make a small dent in helping to save a child or children.
Well, we're the real deal, and that's what we're interested in, is helping people who have been victimized, and even young adults.
My goodness, it's heartbreaking to know that those in authority are not even interested in helping, because they've already been labeled and already just put as, you know, castaways. So I'm just grateful for organizations like yourself and people like yourself, Lois, that are there to really, really help. Thank you so much for the work that you do.
Thank you for giving me a chance to speak with you today.
You're very welcome. And I'm going to connect with you off this to see if what I can do, so that it's not just a case of I'm talking about this, I want to do something.
Well, I think it's a matter of starting in the community and starting in the churches and going around speaking to churches and speaking to the members of the churches about what they can do and what their sense of responsibility should be. Speaking to pastors and priests. I don't agree with everything the church, all the stands on the church, but I do think that there are only source of help for these children.
And that I can, as I said to you, as a minister and knowing other ministers, that is definitely something I can do. So thank you for that. And I'll definitely make a start there. Lois, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care now.
Okay, bye-bye.